Have you ever reached a point where you don't recognize yourself anymore? The way you think has changed. What you once tolerated, you no longer can. What used to feel familiar doesn't feel right anymore. And there can be a strange feeling that comes with that. Almost like a sense of loss, but not really. Like something is ending, but at the same time, something else is beginning. And it can feel confusing. Almost like you've lost yourself, but something deeper is happening. What many people don't realize is that this is often a sign that something within you is changing. Not in a surface level way, but at the level of who you are. Because when you begin to heal deeply, you don't just let go of the past. You can feel like you are becoming someone new. And today, we're going to talk about why that happens. If you're new here, I'm Naomi Carr. I share deeper conversations around healing, self-awareness, and returning to yourself. The ones many of us didn't grow up having. After what I spoke about in one of my recent videos, when I stopped reacting, I went into a much deeper level of healing. And it felt like the version of me that had been shaped over a lifetime. The girl who was born to my parents all those years ago had been stripped away. The roles, the conditioning, the identity I had carried for so long. It all began to fall apart. And those experiences made me question everything, even whether I had done the right thing by sharing my story at all. Because when you begin to speak your truth, not everyone will be able to meet you there. And that can be incredibly painful and incredibly isolating. There's a period where it felt like I had gone into the underbelly of everything. Like I had descended into the deepest parts of my life, the parts I had carried, avoided, and survived. And in that space, it felt like I had lost myself completely. My creativity, my voice, the part of me that had always expressed so freely went quiet. And I remember thinking, will I ever write again? And that scared me. Because creating, expressing, that had always been the breath of my life. But what I didn't understand at the time was that I wasn't losing myself. I was being stripped of everything that wasn't truly me. And during that time, something else began to happen. In the middle of the night, I would hear the word, know thyself. And then I would wake up in the morning and it would be there again. And throughout the day, it was like those words followed me, quietly and consistently. For months, that stayed with me. And slowly I began to understand that I was being called inward, not to become something new, but to come back to what had always been there. And over time, something began to emerge. Not the version of me shaped by fear or by needing to belong, but a version of me that felt stronger, clearer, more grounded in who I am. I found my voice again, but this time it was different. There was less fear, less need for approval, less need to belong or people please, and a deeper trust in what I know to be true for me. One of the reasons you may not recognize yourself anymore is because so much of who you thought you were was learned. From a very young age, we began to adapt to our environments, to our families, to what is accepted and what is not. We learn how to behave, how to respond, how to be liked, how to belong. And little by little, we began building an identity around that. And when you begin doing the inner work we talk about on this channel, something starts to shift. You begin to see those patterns more clearly. You begin to feel what fits and what no longer does. And when I reflect back on my childhood, I see how this played out in my life. I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of control over what you were meant to think, what you were meant to believe, and even who you were allowed to be. And I remember being a little girl and hearing those messages about who I was, what was good, what was bad. But I also remember something else. There was a quiet voice inside of me that would say, I'm not those things you say I am. And I spent a lot of time in my own mind. That became a place where I could go to feel free. Looking back now, I can see that was how I learned to survive. And sometimes I think about it like this, almost like I had created a kind of protection around my mind to hold on to who I really was. Because there was part of me that knew, even if I didn't fully understand it at the time. But over time, that voice got quieter. Because when you grow up in an environment like that, you learn to adapt, you learn to fit in. You learn to silence parts of yourself in order to belong. And that's how identity forms. So when you begin healing and those layers start to fall away, you're not becoming someone new. You're beginning to remember, to connect with who you were before the expectations, before the labels, before everything was placed on you, that you learn to carry. And this is where things can start to feel unfamiliar. Because as you begin to reconnect with yourself, there can also be a feeling of loss, but not in the way you usually think of loss. It's not that something real is being taken from you. It's that something familiar is no longer there. And it doesn't just happen internally. You may start to notice it in your life. The things that once mattered to you don't hold the same weight. The roles you once identified with begin to shift. The way you relate to people begins to change. Some relationships may even feel different. Some you may outgrow. Not from a place of rejection, but from a place of alignment. Even your likes and dislikes can begin to change. And this is where it can feel a little disorienting. Because a version of you that once moved through the world no longer feels like a full reflection of who you are. And as this new way of beginning begins to emerge, something else starts to happen. You begin to feel more present, more grounded. There's a different kind of peace, a deeper level of understanding and compassion for yourself and for others. And with that, a quiet confidence begins to build. And over time, it becomes rooted. You start to trust what arises in you. You begin honoring your needs, your desires, your truth in ways you never may have before. And sometimes that can look like your life changing in very real ways. The way you show up, the choices you make, what you're willing to tolerate, and what you're no longer willing to carry. And in the middle of all that, it's not uncommon to feel like you're questioning everything you once knew. But that questioning is part of the process because you're not losing yourself. You're moving out of what was familiar and into what is true. And this is where everything begins to come back to you because the real work is internal. This is where you begin to take back your authority over your own life. And for many of us, this is something we were never taught. We were taught to look outside of ourselves for approval, for validation, for direction, to believe that someone else knows better, that because of their age, their role, or their level of education, they must have more wisdom than we do. And while there is value in learning from others, there's also something that often gets overlooked. Life experience can teach you in ways nothing else can. And I've seen this in my own life. Some of the most meaningful moments of learning for me have come through my children. Even when they were young, there were things they would say that would stop me. And I would sit with it and reflect on it because there was truth in it. And that showed me something important. That wisdom does not only come from age or position or authority. It can come from anywheres. And when you begin to see that, you stop placing yourself beneath others. You stop believing that someone else should be trusted more than you trust yourself. And often we don't even realize that we're doing that. We hand our decisions over. We second guess ourselves. We look outside for answers instead of staying connected to what we already feel. And this doesn't mean that we don't seek guidance. There is value in support. There is value in learning from others. But you stay connected to yourself in the process. I can see this reflected again in my own life. My daughter will come to me sometimes asking for advice, feeling unsure, not knowing what direction to go. And I love that she feels safe enough to come to me like that. But more often than not, I gently guide her back to herself and remind her that she already has the wisdom within her, that she knows what's right for her, and that learning to listen to that is what will guide her. Even in something like your health, you might go to the doctor for guidance, but you're still the one living in your body. And if something feels off, if something doesn't sit right, that matters, because no one else is living your experience for you. And self-trust is learning to stay present with that instead of overriding it. Because if you don't trust yourself, how can you ever fully trust anyone? At some point, you'll have to come back to your own knowing. And part of that means being willing to try, to make decisions, to take action, to move forward, even when you're uncertain. Because there is no perfect way of doing anything in life. Perfection is an illusion. And so often we spend so much time being hard on ourselves, thinking we made a mistake, that we should have done something differently, that we got it wrong. But how do we grow? How do we learn? How do we build trust in ourselves without going through the process? Every step, even the ones we question, is part of building that relationship with ourselves. And over time, that becomes something you can stand on. Quiet confidence that shows up in real ways, in the decisions you make, in the risks you're willing to take, in starting something new, like a business, a relationship, or stepping into something that once felt out of reach. Because you're no longer waiting for permission. You're moving from a place of self-leadership. And that's where everything starts to realign. Before we close, I want to offer a soul musing. In life, we are not given all the answers. So trust becomes our way forward. And as we trust the path unfolding before us, we begin to trust ourselves. And from that self-trust, we learn to live authentically and unapologetically, shaping a life that is truly our own. And maybe the deeper questions to sit with are these. Where in your life are you still looking outside of yourself for answers? Where are you questioning yourself when something inside of you already knows? And what would it look like to begin trusting that voice within you just a little more? And if this resonates with you and you're beginning your own healing journey, I've created a free foundational class called Unlearning Shame and Guilt. You'll find it linked below. And if you're ready to go deeper, I'd invite you to watch this next video on Everything Changes When You Stop Reacting. This will deepen this conversation even further. If this space speaks to you, you're welcome to subscribe and continue with these conversations with me. Because when you begin remembering who you are, everything begins to change. In the ways you think, in the ways you choose, in the way you show up in your life. And I truly believe that when we begin healing ourselves, we create more compassion, more understanding, and ultimately a better world for everyone. With much love, I'll see you in the next one.